So this is debunking the Walker Bragman smear piece on the Great Barrington Declaration. It's not just him. I mean, TYT took it. The whatever they are, the majority report people took it. And yeah, it's all about this whole idea that this is a left wing, right wing situation. It's not, and we know it's not. This is based on reality, data, science. Well, when they talk about science, I'm talking about actual science. So the Daily Poster is who Walker Bragman writes for, and just wait for my review on Don't Look Up, because mine is probably going to be different than what most progressives review is. He writes, this is David Serrata kind of, publication. Now, I used to like David Serrata back 2015, 2016, when he was actually opposing, before he was starting to go vote blue no matter who. So this is a publication, and they do some, good work, like highlighting some things every now and then about what's going on in corruption and domestically and stuff like that. But majorly, it's pretty much right-wingers and left-wingers and right-wingers and left-wingers. And that's basically what this article was about. So I pointed out a couple things here. They start the article by talking about how Hillsdale is a conservative Christian institution with ties to the Trump administration. And the scholars behind the academy, Scott Atlas, Jay Bhattacharya, and Martin Kulldorff, are connected to right-wing dark money attacking public health measures. Now, the people he mentioned are part of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, just so you guys know. So they're saying that they have ties with the Trump administration, with right-wing dark money, just right off the bat. No citations, really. They talk about Hillsdale and their citations, but they don't talk about these three. They say the trio also had ties to the Great Barrington Declaration, a widely rebuked yet influential missive that encouraged governments to adopt a herd immunity policy, letting COVID-19 spread largely unchecked. That is not what herd immunity is, by the way. But okay, even as the virus has killed more than 800,000 Americans, time to fact check all of this. The Academy is the newest initiative designed to provide intellectual cover for a nearly 2-year campaign by right-wing and big business interests to force a return to normalcy, to boast corporate profits amid a pandemic that is now surging once again, thanks to Omicron. So once again, I don't know how many times it said right-wing, but it's a lot. It's a lot right here, okay? And yes, big business interests really want to reopen, but do they? You have Amazon making tons and tons of money, Uber, gigantic corporations making tons and tons of money during lockdowns. Why? Because small businesses go out of business because they can't afford to come back and they have to shut down. So all these people that work for small businesses, or people who work for or their own independent businesses, are the ones you're actually screwing. You're not really screwing the corporations in any way, shape, or form. So here we go. Lockdown measures drove down cases in the U.S. and likely saved millions of lives globally. Likely. But the decline of in-person shopping and work, combined with factory shutdowns in places like China, disrupted the economy. A 2020 report from the corporate consulting firm McKinsey & Co. found the hardest hit industries would take years to recover. I love their sources, McKinsey & Co. So this is where he starts talking about the American Legislative Council, the ALEC, ALEC, a business lobbying group partially funded by Koch Industries, published a letter calling on President Donald Trump to enable states to reopen. To fight its war, the Koch networks also relied on AstroTurf roadmap behind the anti-government Tea Party movement, using its dark money apparatus to coordinate anti-lockdown protests. Anti-lockdown protests were literally people who didn't want to be locked down. Like, it was individuals. You know how I know? Because we were at some of them. We filmed some of them. Our friends were at some of them, like basically trying to find out what was going on. We were in LA where there was a lot of animosity to those protesters. Of course, a lot of them happened to be Trump supporters, because that's just the way, they were suspect of this whole thing from the get-go. That's a whole other conversation as to why the right was more suspect than the left. But the fact is, not every single protest, as they're making it out to be, is some sort of like centralized, right-wing operation. It's kind of like saying that every person that labels himself Antifa is acting at the behest of some sort of centralized, Soros-funded. But it's the same fucking thing. just on the other end of the spectrum. So on October 4th, 2020, the Great Barrington Declaration was released to the world, authored by Stanford University professor Jay Bhattacharya, former Harvard Medical School professor Martin Kulldorff, and Oxford University professor Sunetra Gupta. The declaration recommended governments allow younger, healthier people to become infected with COVID while reserving focused protection for the vulnerable in order to reach herd immunity. Suggestions included having nursing homes limit staff rotations and businesses rely on workers with acquired immunity. Now, this whole thing was followed in other countries, and it seemed to work for them, by the way, because it's not a virus it's like 99.9 something, right? It's a very, most people who get the virus, and most people at this point are going to get the virus, if not everybody, get better. They get better in some form or another, they recover. Whatever means. Yeah, they recover. There is a segment of the population that has been affected. It is people who are overweight, people who have underlying conditions. So those people, yes, the elderly, right? So those people were definitely at high risk for the virus from the get-go. Did it make sense to keep people locked down, away from vitamin D, from sunlight, away from building this sort of immunity? We've talked about how natural immunity is 13 times more effective in many times. And of course, the CDC has said the vaccines are safe and effective. We're not pushing any sort of, one way or another. We're on YouTube, guys. But what we're saying is that there is data to show that natural immunity does have some sort of a function in this. And so he's completely dismissing the natural immunity aspects, providing zero research on that to counteract what he's saying. Yeah. So the most compassionate approach that balances the risk and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death live their lives normally, to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection. Read the declaration. Does that seem to you like a right-wing ideology, Pasta? Does it seem
they've like made it in a right-wing ideology, fam, and that's what they're doing, because then they can get, the emotional left can go, oh my God, look at this. He actually wants to put people out there at risk getting exposed to this when they could have avoided this and stuff. But fam, as we're going along with this, the thing that really is just disgusting is the fact is that what Walker Bragman did with his article, and what a lot of people are doing, is they focused on the wrong thesis of this particular group, the Great Barrington thing, which the fact is that what were the psychological effects of lockdowns compared to actually going into it and trying herd immunity? Which one would have been better? You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people like to talk about, okay, they just act like this virus was the most deadly virus on the face of the earth and we had to go and hide under our bed from it, but then don't factor in all the psychological effects of a lockdown and how it can do, not just on small businesses. If we put away aside the money, whatnot, and everything, because there's more than just money. It's a people's livelihood. People working for many years to start a small business to get there. Not everybody was handed everything. And there are a lot of great success stories in America where people went hard to work and earned their way, whether it be in business or life, whatever the case the situation is. But if you take that away from them, what's the psychological effect that can happen? Was it worth it? Why aren't we looking at the suicides? And that's what, the Great Barrington pointed out, the suicides, the mental health, the child issues, all these things have to be factored in. That's never talked about in the mainstream media. It was talked about here. Well, here's Walker taking a small piece of it and trying to use it to highlight his particular point of view, which is to say that these people are right-wing animals that just wanted us to go out and get infected when we should have been locking ourselves down and hiding under our bed from this deadly disease.
This is right off the bat. It's not, it's not serious journalism. It's obviously biased. They're obviously having some sort of political stance on something that shouldn't have a political stance. He talks about how the Great Barrington Declaration boasted a veneer of academic legitimacy. Its credential authors wrote the letter at a conference hosted by auspicious-sounding American Institute for Economic Research, the AIER, in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where obviously it got its name from. And according to the website, the letter has been signed by 2,700 medical and public scientists, and none of the authors or co-signers received any money, honoraria, stipend, or salary from anyone. But of course, here we go again. It arose from right-wing dark money and corporate interests. Many of the signatories aren't verified. So here's where they go, and they say that the AIER hosted and filmed the conference and registered the declaration's website, and that they're a cocktied libertarian think tank From 2008 to 2020, the Charles Koch Foundation donated more than $100,000 to the Institute. And before that, the Koch Foundation donated nearly $1.5 million to the Emergent Order Foundation, formerly Emergent Order LLC, a PR firm that engaged in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of marketing consulting for the AIER. They also received $54,000 from the Atlas Network, an anti-regulation formerly known as Atlas Economic Research that had received more than $500,000 from Charles Koch Foundation. If you click on the links, he doesn't really show that simply these grants are tied to the actual Great Barrington Declaration, and we're going to go over that in a minute.
And fam, the fact and thing about it is about the Great Barrington Declaration and what Walker Bragman is doing. He accuses the authors of what he is actually guilty of, saying that they are putting aside their doctor degrees and their scientist degrees and whatnot, and they're playing team sports. No, this article is a great example of him playing team sports, trying to have a gotcha moment and stretch a small thing and make it the whole scope of what's going on. Meanwhile, when we played some of these authors just not too long ago, talking about, the psychological effects of lockdowns. And I believe they were genuine when they did this piece, and what they're doing still to this day. It's Walker Bragman who's not being genuine, and he's playing team sports, trying to make this a right-left issue, which is very, very divisive, instead of saying, okay, what is actually in this here? Let's talk about the psychological effects. Are they worth it? No, he won't do it.
According to Coldroff, which is one of the gentlemen that was part of this whole thing, he said, Koch-affiliated foundations funded pro-lockdown COVID research by Dr. Neil Ferguson at Imperial College, but they have never funded me, either directly or indirectly. This is what he said. Lockdowns have generated huge profits for Koch and other big businesses while throwing children and the working class under the bus. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. That's what the lockdowns have done. So he's refuting this whole thing. And of course, he just uses this whole thing like the Great Barrington Declaration and its natural immunity strategy were widely derided by scientists around the world. The strategy was condemned by the Infectious Diseases Society of America and its HIV Medicine Association, while World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus called it unethical. Thousands of medical professionals called on governments to disregard strategies that rely on natural infection. What medical professionals? You just mentioned the WHO, the World Health Organization. Of course, they're going to degrade this. Of course, these people that are part of the Disease Society of America, its HIV Medicine Association, Fauci, of course, all these people. And we're going to go into exactly the mechanisms, because Fauci and his cohort actually shut down debate and led a propaganda campaign to discredit the Great Barrington Declaration back in October. And there's email proof of how they did just that. And so I'm going to read a couple things from it, because they call them all fringe. This is what they do. They smear. Yeah. And this is from the Wall Street Journal that actually did a whole thing on this, by the way.
Yeah. We covered this the other day too, as well. So there's a little bit more in depth as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, so they call them three fringe epidemiologists, and they're saying they got so much attention, and even a co-signature from Nobel Peace Prize winner Mike Levy at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating polished takedown of its premises. And this is what Dr. Collins wrote. And is it underway, he asked. And so the article argues that they weren't fringe, that their opposition and neither was their opposition in quarantining society, but the panic over the virus, they used their scientific authority to stigmatize dissenters and crush debate. A week after this email, Dr. Collins spoke to the Washington Post about the Great Barrington Declaration, saying this is a fringe component of epidemiology. This is not mainstream science. It's dangerous. And this is what they tell people when you're talking about something truthful. They say you're dangerous. You're dangerous. You're spreading misinformation. You're putting people in danger. And obviously, Fauci emailed an article from The Nation, a left-wing magazine, and his staff sent him several more. The email suggested a feedback loop. The media cited Dr. Fauci as an unquestionable authority. And this is my issue with these people when they say it's science. It's all these medical professionals. They're putting Fauci as like an unquestionable god when it comes to this, right? And Dr. Fauci, of course, got his talking points from media. Facebook censored mentions of the Great Barrington Declaration. This is how groupthink works. On CBS last month, Dr. Fauci said Republicans who criticize him are, quote, really criticizing science because I represent science. That's dangerous. He isn't science, and it's also dangerous for scientific officials to mobilize to quash dissent, without which it's easy to make a tragic mistake. A scientific debate over pandemic policy was and still is the public interest, especially during a once-in-a-century plague. That when you talk about science and doctors, Fauci isn't the only voice, especially Fauci with his history of butchering and literally being the, indirectly killing people, the experiments he has done, and the whole fallout with the AIDS epidemic. How are you putting Fauci at the helm of this? Anything to say, Pasta, before I go on?
No, I just love the way that in his article, in Bragman's article, and I just got a text from somebody who's like, this is a great show on those Coke suckers, because he does mention the Charles Koch a lot. You know what I'm saying? These are the buzzwords that a lot of people go, and if he can tie that in there, he can just throw it out there. And everybody is small-minded on the situation, especially people on the left who really don't understand the nuance of things. They hear the words, oh, libertarian think tank, oh, Koch, the Koch brothers, Atlas Network, it immediately shut it down. They don't look into it. They don't see anything. They classify these people as right wingers. These guys have been exposed from the get-go. Fauci was, had it out for these people from the get-go. With Collins, they had a plan to go out there and do what everybody else is doing. What Walker Bragman's doing to these people here in the Great Barrington Declaration is the same thing that Fauci and Collins did right out of the gate. It's just to smear and just demonize these people, right? Make them look like they're nothing. They're stupid. That what they have to say is dumb.
They're conspiracy theorists.
That's a tactic that's used a lot, right? You get one little issue that they might think differently of. Therefore, you forget all the other issues because they're so bad on this one, But
in this article, they criticize this whole idea. They say more than 800,000 Americans have died as much of the country followed the strategy of Dr. Collins's and Fauci's. And that's not counting the other costs in lost livelihoods, shuttered businesses, untreated illnesses, mental illnesses from isolation, and the incalculable anguish of seeing loved ones die alone without the chance for a family to say goodbye. Why aren't you talking about that, Walker? Why aren't you talking about that? So, and this article just ends by saying, dude, I don't even like the Wall Street Journal, but this was an opinion piece that presented a lot of information. And they said, rather than try to manipulate public opinion, the job of health officials is to offer their best scientific advice. They shouldn't act like politicians or censors. And when they do, they squander the public's trust. That's exactly what's happening here. I think Danny Haifong today pointed out, there are no anti-mandates protests in China, Cuba, and I forget where else he said, but he was like, but there are also no mandates there. So there's also that whole sentiment in America. There's no mandates in other countries. They don't do that. Well, why do you have to mandate a country to do something here? Because public distrust is so intense. The people do not trust their government with good reason, right? The government has been lying to us since its inception. Since its beginning, the government has been lying to us. And so for me, it's like, well, in some of these countries, the government actually does work for the benefit of people. I'm not going to say all that. There's nothing wrong with some of these countries, but people genuinely feel like the government works for them. Just like we saw when we were in Nicaragua, people feel like the government does stuff for them, so they support the government. It kind of works in that way. But when you have a government that constantly lies to you, when you have a people, minorities that have been just exploited by the government, experimented on, they're not going to trust the government. So it's that simple.
It's funny too, because when China did lock down people, they had their lockdowns, they got out of them quickly because they actually treated people, not with vaccines, but, giving them vitamin C drips and chloroquine to get that zinc into their system. So they actually had, their protocols were great. Once again, it might not be the best way too, as well. I'm not going to justify any authoritarian measures, but when they handled the situation, they handled it with natural remedies that got people healthy and better quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if I would call their measures any more authoritarian than ours, because ours were we went on lockdown too. The entire world went on lockdown. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. It was a scary time, and nobody knew what was going on. Everybody was trying to figure out what was happening. as it was happening. And so a lot of people have changed, their takes before, even journalists. We've talked about this, how they thought the government should act. Initially I wasn't opposed to the lockdown when it was happening, but afterwards, just seeing how they used and weaponized that to try to do it again and again and again. And obviously we weren't getting anything, that people weren't receiving what they were going to receive. Then it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. People who are opposed to any sort of government at all, period, were always opposed to a lockdown because they don't want the government telling them what to do. So that you have to take all those things into connotation. But here is Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci. So Francis Collins from the NIH sent him the email to Anthony Fauci once again, and they CC'd Lawrence Tabeck, and it said, "Hi, Tony. Hi, Cliff. See the Great Barrington Declaration.org." So he put the website. "This proposal from 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention. And even a co-signer from Nobel Prize winner Mike Leavitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown on its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway? Francis." So then they began doing this, was back in October of 2020. So guys, this is what they do. This is what they've been doing. This is what actually happens to people like us, anybody that's actually opposing anything. I have literally seen messages from people saying, we need to take down Fiorella's account. She's dangerous. She's spreading this and that. She needs to go down. We need to report her. I have seen that same type of language. I've seen it with other politicians that were once thought of progressives. I've seen it with people talking about other journalists like Glenn Greenwald or Max Blumenthal, and other people that like Jimmy Dore, even I've seen. We need to get rid of these people. They're getting a lot of attention. You shouldn't have this platform. Why does she have a following? We need to stop that. She's dangerous. And so it's the same language that they're using, and Walker is just welcoming that language because he doesn't like some of these people's ideology on the vaccine, or he thinks it's a right-wing thing. He doesn't like our stance on it and the stance of Max Blumenthal. They have been smearing the entire gray zone. People are saying, why is gray zone posting anti-vax information? And when you read what they're writing, it's anti-mandate. It's questioning the government power, the media lies, the censorship. That's not flat out saying, don't do this or that. But it doesn't matter, because all they hear is anti-vax, and they don't look at anything else.
It's funny too, because it's very childish. And this is where our adults are in our society right now. If you don't like something that someone's saying, you should debate the actual merits of what they're saying. Instead, we have this whole culture now, from Fauci to Walker Bragman, where they'll just go out and smear the person. Just go after the person, the jihad. We know who these people are. And it's sad, and it really is childish. And a lot of people are kind of piggybacking on this mentality, and it really just shows a lot about their own integrity inside. If you don't believe that what somebody is saying, debate them on the merits of the issue. Talk about it, no matter what it is. Don't go out there and just smear the person because you don't like what they have to say. But we have a whole society, especially a whole society of leftist commentators that use this tactic, and it's very, very sad.
Martin Koldorf wrote a rebuttal, pretty much refuting everything they were saying a couple months ago in October. He said, COVID lockdown and the retreat of scientific debate. And this is a really great article if you haven't read it. It's on the spectator.co.uk. And he talks about science is about rational disagreement and the questioning and testing of orthodoxy and constant search for truth. With something like a lockdown, an untested policy that affects millions, rigorous debate and the basics of verification/falsification are more important than ever. Academics backing lockdown or any major theory ought to welcome challenges, knowing as scientists do that robust challenge is the way to identify error, improve policy, and save lives. Okay, so then he goes and talks about with the lockdown, science is in danger of being suppressed by politics. Lockdown moved instantly from untested theory to unchallengeable orthodoxy. And that's what we've seen. Believe science. I believe science. You don't believe science. There's not rooted in any sort of logic, right? Where dissenters face personal attack Understandable on social media, perhaps, but it has now crept into the British medical journal, the BMI, in a recent article about the Great Barrington Declaration, the GBD. The GBD, which I wrote together with Dr. J. Bhattacharya at Stanford and Dr. Sunetra Gupta at Oxford, argues for focused protection rather than a blanket lockdown, which inflicts so much harm on society. We wanted better protection for those most at risk, mindful that COVID typically poses only a mild risk to the young. For saying so, we were smeared as the new merchants of doubt, as if skepticism and challenge is regarded by the BMJ as something to be condemned. So I'm just reading this article, and this is his opinion, but he states, the BMJ article is full of errors. And this is the article that Walker Bragman used. This is the article that TYT used. This is the article that all of these smear merchants have used against not only these three scientists and doctors, but also against anyone discussing this, including, of course, Max Blumenthal and members of the Gray Zone who brought this up as well. And so he said it's full of errors. So here are some of them. My colleagues and I are described as critics of public health measures to curb COVID-19. On the contrary, throughout the pandemic, we have strongly advocated for better public health measures to curb COVID-19, specifically protection of high-risk older people with many clearly defined proposals. And he cites his sources, what he means by that. The failure to implement such measures, in our view, has led to many unnecessary COVID deaths, like having protocols in place. 2, we are described as proponents of herd immunity, which is akin to accusing someone of being in favor of gravity. Both are scientifically established phenomena. Every COVID strategy leads to herd immunity. The key is to minimize morbidity and mortality. The language here is non-scientific. Herd immunity is not creed. It's how pandemics end. It says we have expressed opposition to mass vaccination. Dr. Gupta and I have spent decades on vaccine research, and we are all strong advocates for COVID and other vaccines. They are among the greatest inventions in history. To falsely credit the anti-vaccine movement with support from professors at Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford is damaging for vaccine confidence. This is unworthy of a medical journal. So he's even saying, no, we're for vaccines, specifically just in particular, better ones. The GBD is referred to as this sophisticated science denialism. Note here how something that challenges an orthodoxy is described as anti-science, a label that presumably could have been applied to any scientific innovator who ever questioned or failed orthodoxy. Collateral public health damage from COVID restrictions are real and enormous, and on cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, backsliding childhood vaccinations, starvation, and mental health, just to name a few. It is not the GBD, but those who downplay lockdown harms who should be equated with those who question the harms of tobacco or climate change. The GBD was not sponsored by the American Institute of Economic Research. This is a statement made in Walker Bragman's article, specifically being refuted by one of the scientists and doctors here. And I am pleased to see that the BMJ has at least retracted this claim. We were there for the media interviews with no sponsorship. How did such a blunder end up in print in the first place? The AIER staff did not ever even know about the declaration until the day before it was signed. And the AER president and board did not know about it until after publication. If we had written the declaration at, say, Starbucks, would the BMJ have claimed that it was sponsored by the coffee shop? So again, they're saying that because it was all there, that they were directly sponsored by it. So his point is, like if we wrote it at Starbucks, then does that mean Starbucks is sponsored? It's just fucking ridiculous, the arguments these people are making. And so the BMJ article mentions the AER contributor, Scott Atlas. This is again mentioned in Walker Bragman's article. But Dr. Atlas has never been affiliated with nor written for AIER. Neither have we. Unless the BMJ also views us as affiliated with hundreds of universities and organizations that we have visited during our careers or that have reprinted some of our articles, Dr. Atlas was not even aware that the AIER had reprinted one of his articles until the BMJ linked to it. Several AEIR employees have gracefully supported the Great Barrington Declaration, just like countless other people around the world. But we have never received any money from the AEIR. The basic error, again, exposes how normal checks did not appear to have been applied to the BMJ. And the BMJ is the article that Walker once again used, and these TYT people and the Majority Report people used to try to smear everybody else who is trying to talk about this thing. And number 7, the BMJ article ends by saying that my colleagues and I are peddling a well-funded, sophisticated science denialist campaign based on ideological and corporate interests. Nobody has paid us any money for our work on the GBD or for advocating focused protection. None of us would have undertaken this project for professional gain. It is literally destroying their credibility to even talk about this. It is far easier to stay silent than put your head above the parapet. As a vaccine developer, Dr. Gupta has connections with the pharmaceutical startup, but Dr. Bhattacharya and I are among the few drug/vaccine scientists who purposely avoid the pharmaceutical company funding to be free from conflicts of interest, which is what scientists should do, because one is for profit, the other one's actually trying to find science, use science to help people. And so they attempted to link them to the Koch brothers. This is the essence of Walker's article, in an ad hominem attack of the highest order, but failed to mention much closer connections. We all work for universities that have received donations from Koch foundations, although unrelated to any of our own work. While the IER has received only a single 68,000 Koch donations a few years ago, many universities have received multiple much larger Koch donations, including $1 million gifts to Duke, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford. Since university staff frequently publish in the BMJ, the journal is arguably more closely connected to a network of organizations funded by Charles Koch than the AIER. So he's saying, like, if you're going to go after us for being in universities that have been funded by the Koch brothers, then you have to go after pretty much any other scientist was published in this magazine, the BMJ. So you would the British Medical Journal. So you would have to go after everyone if you were operating like this. But no, that's not how they're doing it. You see how they're taking certain entities. And so he talks about how many scientists have received research funding from private foundations. And, private foundations you should be thankful for it, because it's a good thing to receive money to do your projects, but it's hypocritical and discriminatory for the BMJ to single out Dr. Gupta because her lab received limited funds from the Opel Foundation. As one of many examples, Neil Ferguson and his team at Imperial College were awarded a prize by the Koch-affiliated Mercatus Center's Emergent Ventures program. During a pandemic, it is the duty of public health scientists to engage with government officials to use their expertise to confront what right now is perhaps the biggest single problem facing humanity. It is hard to understand why anyone would criticize that. If we are to be faulted for anything, it is that we failed to convince governments to implement focused protection instead of damaging lockdowns. One place where we had some success was Florida, where the cumulative age-adjusted COVID mortality is lower than the U.S. national average, with less collateral damage. If we are wrong, then as scientists, we would welcome a scientific discussion on how and where we are wrong. And so, we can talk about Florida. We're here right now. Florida is just you just don't see, the mask. You don't see the lockdown. You see people have it working. You see small businesses. Still, some have suffered, but not to the level of what's happened in California. He's not, in Walker's article, he was like, he's amplifying
DeSantis
right-wing, Governor Ron DeSantis's right-wing message. No, he's saying that Florida handled the pandemic better. And I'm saying that as somebody who lives in California, where we have ridiculous measures and it has helped absolutely no one but the fucking rich. The working class people are suffering right now because of that.
Yeah, well, the whole gist of what they were saying at that last part of the last principal point they were trying to make is that they're open to debate, they're open to talking, but they're never going to get that. We're never going to have this open, robust debate about how lockdowns can psychologically affect us. On the last show, when we did talk about this, I put up Alex Rubinstein's partner, Mila, who kind of writes about the psychology of what's going on, or why people are getting into the team mentality, or their political ideology comes from how society is today. But she also mentioned too as well about why isn't anybody having this open discussion about what the effects psychologically a lockdown could do. And that's something we're just never going to get to. You're just going to hear one side say their thing, the other side is going to speak. And once again, people like ourselves, we're open for debate, we're open for conversations. If somebody wanted to talk to me and debate, I don't even want to say debate, but just openly have a conversation where they disagreed about as far as treatments and therapy and every steps of the COVID, I'm willing to do that. But they're not really willing to have us on those shows for those people who feel that way. It's the same plan the progressive commentators have followed of the Democratic Party. And that's just say what you have to say, demean, demoralize, and avoid any dissenting type of voice, any opinion that's different than yours. Just stay in your own bubble, get your message out, and that's that. And so, it is a shame. And we see that on right-wing television too as well. My mom, when she does have Fox on, when she watches some of her shows, we'll see these people make their opinions. Nobody's there to combat them, especially when it comes to China, when it comes to Iran. They just get to say what they want to say, and they'll put up lies, and they won't have any dissenting voice against them. That's why I like RT. That's why I like Crosstalk. It's because they invite that arena, right? You'll always see on the little newscast they'll have a clip of two people who disagree going back and forth on a subject. And that's the type of robust debate we need and should be encouraged. Exactly. But it's not encouraged in our society. It's just stay in your bubble, demean, demoralize, and go, go, go.
And to wrap up this article, they talk about the Israeli study suggesting that natural immunity could be a strong protection. And then he says, this last part I want to read because this is so pertinent to what's happening right now. Because of political strategies using slander and ad hominem attacks, many physicians and scientists have been reluctant to speak out despite their reservations about pandemic policies. The error-strewn attacks in the British Medical Journal demonstrate what awaits academics who do challenge prevailing views. That such an article was published exemplifies the decay in standards of scientific journals. Open and honest discourse is critical for science and public health. As scientists, we must now tragically acknowledge that 400 years of scientific enlightenment may be coming to an end. It started with Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, Galileo or Galilei, and René Descartes. It would be tragic if we would end up as one of the many casualties of this pandemic. And that's exactly what's happening. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And people like Walker Bragman and his publication are absolutely fueling more of